So, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this evening for another event with our partners, My Menopause Centre. And on this occasion, we're looking at how to eat well for menopause. Before I hand over to Helen, who will chair this evening's event, I just want to remind you of a couple of housekeeping points. Please post your questions and thoughts in the chat function at the bottom of your screens, and feel free to post throughout the presentation. And there'll also be some time for questions at the end of the event. So this event will run for 1 hour and will be recorded and mailed to all who registered for it. So now I'd like to hand over to our panel chair, Helen Normoyle, who is co-founder of My Menopause Centre. Helen has held Chief Marketing Officer roles across healthcare, beauty, broadcast, furniture and property sectors, and is a self-described women's wellness champion. Over to you, Helen.
Hi, Aideen. Good evening, and thanks very much for that lovely welcome. And good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this, what I have no doubt is going to be a brilliant conversation, but particularly on such a lovely, sunny spring evening. Now, as we mentioned in the invitation, we're going to be discussing how the menopause transition changes our bodies and why, when it comes to food and nutrition, we really do need to approach things differently. We're joined by the brilliant Dr. Clare Spencer, my really good friend and co-founder of My Menopause Centre, and Clare is a menopause specialist and GP, and by Nigel Denby. Not only is Nigel an award-winning registered dietitian, he's also the founder of the 40,000 strong menopause support community, Harley Street at Home, and his special clinical interests in menopause and in women's hormonal health and lifelong weight management and many more. And I know, because we've done events already with Nigel, he's got some brilliant, practical, grounded advice that he's going to share with everyone this evening. So we're going to kick off without further ado. And Claire, I'm going to start with a question for you. If you could just kind of frame this more generally, why is it that our bodies change during the menopause transition, and how do they change?
Thank you, Helen, and good evening, everybody. It's really lovely to be here again. So in the menopause transition, one of the key changes is in our ovarian hormone estrogen and the levels in our blood. So before the menopause, our estrogen fluctuates rhythmically up and down every month, and for most women that will give a regular monthly period. In the menopause transition, those fluctuations start to lose their rhythmicity. They start to become more erratic, and the troughs at the bottom become deeper. And so there are 2 points to this in terms of impact. So those erratic fluctuations can trigger some symptoms, for example, anxiety and migraine. And then the deeper troughs can trigger symptoms of estrogen deficiency. And how this impacts our body, it will be different for every single woman. We know that there are 38, 40, maybe more symptoms related to that loss and fluctuation of estrogen. And women will have their own experience as we go through that transition. But in terms of physical change, the decrease in estrogen probably induces something called insulin resistance for many women, where our body doesn't process carbohydrates in quite the same way that it used to. And that makes us more inclined to put fat on round the middle, that horrible middle-age spread. And then that makes the whole situation worse. And then there are other physical changes, like there may be our body is more inclined to lose muscle. And so with that, our ZIP and metabolic rate, the rate that our body processes food can decrease. So that makes us then more inclined to gain weight. And then there are all those symptoms that I mentioned. So psychological symptoms as well as physical symptoms, which can then impact on motivation, our energy, our sleep. So we become less inclined to want to go and exercise in some cases, and maybe more inclined to reach for comfort food rather than really thinking about our diet. And alcohol as well. Many women, particularly if you're not sleeping, tend to reach for a glass of wine or a gin and tonic, which again is empty calories and again is more inclined to be put on as fat. Therefore, so they're the depressing changes. The positive is I know that Nigel's going to talk a lot about things that can help. But in a nutshell, they're the key changes that can make us inclined to put weight on, and the physical changes of the menopause.
Thanks, Sarah. It's really helpful to have that overview. And as we always say, knowledge really is empowering. So just understanding what's going on in our body, the change that, the changes that are brought about by the fluctuation in estrogen in particular. And as we said, Nigel, we're going to come back to weight gain in a moment. But before we do, linked to what Claire has just discussed, why is it that certain foods, and then for me personally at least, unfortunately, red wine and other forms of alcohol, affect us in usually unwelcome ways?
Well, more often than not, as Claire mentioned, it always seems to come back to estrogen. And estrogen receptors are literally all over the body. And sometimes when you're having something like red wine, you might find that actually you're no longer able to tolerate it in the same way that you could before. You might find that you start flushing a lot more around the face when you drink red wine. That actually, it just doesn't make you feel good. The hangover from even just half a glass can be really leave you feeling as if you'd had more like half a bottle the night before. So you become much more sensitive in the same way you might find you become more sensitive to things like caffeine as well. You may, as Claire mentioned, if you're struggling with sleep, I think for me, one of the things we really see is that when your sleep is on its knees, if you're struggling with a couple of hours sleep, decent sleep most nights, and that's going on over a prolonged period of time, you're reliant on foods that are high in sugar, high in fat, generally high in calories, will become much, much more just to function. The body will have learned over the years that sugary foods, fatty foods give you a quick burst of energy. Problem is, of course, you don't sustain that level of energy over a long period of time, and you can easily start getting into a period of, as well as fluctuating levels of estrogen, fluctuating levels of blood sugar as well, which then cause another reaction with another hormone, insulin, and you can just feel utterly wretched. So I think for me, one of the things I'm always keen to do before we start embarking on huge dietary changes is, if you are struggling with symptoms, I often think you've got to prioritize those first. A lot of the things that I will ask women to do are really quite simple. The difficult part is putting them into practice and keeping them going. You're not going to be able to do that when you feel wretched. You've got to start feeling better and start feeling a bit more like yourself before you can start investing in the effort and the time it's going to take to feel better, move more, do all of the lifestyle elements as well.
Yeah, and we're going to dig a bit deeper into some of those, but Claire's alluded to this already, Nigel. The $60 million question that so many of us ask is just, why am I putting on weight? It's creeping up. My eating habits haven't changed my exercise regime, and creeping up particularly around the tummy. And sometimes I feel like the weight is even shifted from one part of our body to another. What's causing all of that? And is there, and somebody's asked the question here, what do we say about insulin? And I know you're going to touch on insulin resistance. So Philippa will touch on that now.
Yeah, absolutely, Philippa. So again, just to kind of echo what Claire was saying, it was the estrogen that gave you your female shape. So even if you've been heavy before, prior perimenopause, most women will have a slightly nipped in waist. You know, that hourglass shape. That's different from a male physique. And it was estrogen was giving you that. As your estrogen begins to reduce, you change the way you lay down fat. Essentially, start to lay fat down more like a bloke. And that's why you'll find often weight that you gain is around that midriff area. Women will often come and say, all of a sudden my bra doesn't fit, my jackets, my blouses don't fit. It tends to be all around the trunk. So it's not the fall in estrogen itself is making you gain weight. All that's doing is changing where you put that weight. Claire mentioned that fall in metabolic rate with the reduction of lean muscle tissue, absolutely critical. That combination is almost the perfect storm for weight gain. Now, what we tend to see is at least 50% of women. I think it's much higher. The evidence we've got at the minute suggests 50% of women will gain around about 1 kilo to 1.5 kilos every year of their perimenopause. Again, it can be a lot more than that. The average weight gain over the perimenopause is about 10 kilos. That is at least a dress size. It's 1.5 stone. And if you're a 5'4", 5'5" lady, you are really going to notice that, particularly if it's all around that central area. I think it's really important, though, as well, to acknowledge that, yeah, there are hormonal changes and there are metabolic changes that are going on. We have to, there is another elephant in the room. We have all, by the time we get to our 40s and 50s, we have all picked up relationships with food. We have picked up habits around grazing, alcohol, portion sizes. We probably got away with when we were 30. You've got to get this bit to your mind, though. Body has now changed. It is a different body. You're not going to get away with those small things you perhaps got away with when you're 30. Similarly, if you did manage to lose that 1/2 stone so you could go on holiday and into your swimsuit easily with any kind of bath diet, doesn't matter, you managed to do that when you were 30, you're not going to do it with the same sort of regime in your mid-40s and 50s. Again, you almost got to wipe the slate clean, think this is now a different body. It's a different approach, controlling weight.
That's great, Nigel. Thank you. That's that it's really helpful to understand that. And I think, you know, it's important to call out what's driving the weight gain and how we can manage it. But linked to that is, we know that on top of the weight gain, it can exacerbate some of the other underlying conditions that are associated with postmenopausal life, which many people aren't possibly aware of. And again, in the spirit of knowledge is empowering, there's two that we're going to focus in on in particular because they're so important to health span. Claire, we're going to start with you in heart disease, and then we'll come back to Nigel to talk about osteoporosis. But it would be brilliant if you could just share with us what are the key changes that happen for women when it comes to heart health?
Yes, thanks, Helen. So what many women don't realise is before the menopause, women have a lower risk of heart disease than that of men because estrogen is protective on our cardiovascular system or our heart system. And then as we go through the menopause, the risk overtakes that of men's. And this is because there are a number of changes that occur because of the loss of estrogen. Again, so our good fats in our blood can decrease on the bad fats in our blood that can clog up the arteries, and particularly around the heart or in the brain, that increase our risk of things like angina, heart attack, stroke. So the bad fats start to increase. And it's really interesting. Estrogen also helps prevent calcification or clogging up with little calcium plaques in our blood vessels as well, that again the end result is that increased risk of angina, heart attacks and stroke. So that the slightly depressing statistics are that there are around 3.5 million women with heart disease in the UK at the moment. And although many women totally understandably really worry about the risk of breast cancer in our 40s, 50s, 60s and beyond, actually twice as many women are likely to die from heart disease than they are of breast cancer. Not belittling the diagnosis of breast cancer, but again, it's just that awareness of the risk. And by the age of 60, about 50% of women will have hypertension or high blood pressure. So what this means is the menopause is a really good time to address all of this. You know, a lot of this can be turned around. You know, we can steer that ship to keep our risk low by looking at diet, by looking at exercise, by stopping smoking if we're smoking. If there's a tendency to diabetes and type 2 diabetes, you know, we can address that. And then other risk factors are obviously family history, which if you've got a family history of heart disease, then that makes it all the more important to sort of look at that right now, look at your risk factors and just see what you can do to minimize them going forward in that 40% that is our entire life spent in the post-menopause. So although the statistics are stark, you know, we can do something about it.
Thanks, Claire. And we're getting some great questions in the chat, so keep them coming in. I think we'll take all the HRT ones together in a group. Claire and Nigel, some clear ones coming in for you here. But before we come into the so what can we do about it? There's another important condition, a really important one to call out. Nigel, just talk to us a bit about osteoporosis and osteopenia.
Yep. Absolutely. So most of you will have seen images of those ladies that are all hunched over with a hump on their back, or no ladies that have literally just bang into the kitchen units and can fracture their hip with just the gentlest of stumbles. Osteoporosis is all about just the bones losing their density and their strength. Again, our old friend estrogen has been protecting your bones and helping to maintain that level of density. As you begin to lose your levels of estrogen, as those begin to decline, so too does that bone density, and it almost becomes a case of catch up. You're not going to be able to replace the density, but you're trying to slow down the rate at which you're losing it. Now, if you're taking HRT, that's going to give you act as a really positive way of reducing that reduction in bone density. If you're not taking HRT, it is almost non-negotiable. You have got to achieve your calcium requirement each day. All of us, with or without HRT, have got to be taking a vitamin D supplement, especially through the autumn and winter months. You want one, you don't need a fancy one, nothing posh, just go to your supermarket, Holland & Barrett, Superdrug, Boots, 10 micrograms or 400 international units of vitamin D a day. Vitamin D is going to help you use the calcium that you need. You've got to get the calcium in too. So in order to get enough, you're looking at either 3 servings of dairy food a day, and that's going to be about 200 mils of low-fat milk, about 35 grams serving of cheese, and 125 grams of yogurt. Each of those added together give you around 800 milligrams of calcium. That's what your bones need. If you're following a plant-based diet and avoiding dairy food, please, ladies, make sure your non-dairy alternatives are fortified with calcium. They don't have to be by law. Many of them are nothing more than white water with no real nutritional value at all. So check that out. And if you aren't able to reach your calcium requirements through diet, you might want to consider a bone health supplement, something like OsteoCare. Those are the only times you really need to think about supplement. Vitamin D for everybody. You might supplement calcium if you can't get enough from your diet. Don't just plow in supplements for the sake of it. They're not Smarties. You take them where there's a clinical need.
Brilliant, Nigel. That's really clear, and it tees us up very nicely to kind of the next questions. And we've had some questions come in this area. So what can I do? What I did before isn't working. What can I do to manage my weight sustainably? And as you said, and as Claire said, in a healthy way and without feeling miserable and deprived. And Claire, I think when Nigel has talked us around this, I think it'd be great to take some questions and to talk about the role of HRT. But just so you're ready, maybe you can have a quick look at the chat and some of the great questions that have come through. So Nigel, back to you. What's your recommendation for in this area?
Okay, thank you, Helen. And really, I would say if you have been a dieter, almost see this as your opportunity to stop dieting and start looking at building a long-term lifestyle plan. Is not only going to help you manage your weight through the menopause, but also in the decades ahead of you. This is your chance to break out that diet mentality. So what I would do is start at the beginning with a 3 to 4 day food and activity diary. Just do what you normally do. Look at that diary. The sorts of things that I tend to see most commonly being the problem is not the fact people are sitting down and eating pie and chips and drinking 6 pints of lager a day. That is not what most people do. Most people eat reasonably okay. They just eat too much. And there are certain habits that are going on that are not helpful. So what I would do when you do your diary, look out for your portion sizes. If you live in a house full of folks, have a look at the size of your meal compared to theirs. Very often, women are eating the same amount as the men in their house. You just do not need that quantity of food. But also look back at throughout the day and see how regularly you're eating. I like really to be eating every 4 hours. So that's going to be a breakfast, bland snack, something like a piece of fruit, a yogurt, some cheese and a couple of oat cakes, a slice of malt loaf, simple foods, nice nutrient dense foods, not crisps, not cake, not biscuits, but a planned snack, and a nice lunch, snack in the afternoon, and a dinner. I'll come to intermittent fasting, Hayley Bell, don't you start me. Right, but when we think about those meals, again, if you look at your plate, and this is breakfast and dinner, look at your plate, imagine it divided into 4 quarters. 1 quarter carbohydrate, bread, potato, rice, pasta, cereal. 1 quarter protein, meat, fish, chicken, tofu, eggs, nuts, and half that plate fruit, veg or salad. If you do that, pretty much takes care of the nutrients, pretty much takes care of the calories if you then do the next bit. So you've balanced your plate, you've eaten regularly. Now look at the whole plate of food and imagine that could fit into your cupped hand. That's the portion of food, a meal. For most people, will take you to a point of satiety. Satiety just means no longer hungry, not stuffed. Far too many of us are eating when we're ravenous, and then we eat quickly until we're stuffed. So remember, you've eaten regularly, you've got your breakfast, snack, dinner. Balance your plate, portion control. The meal, eat slowly. Really slow it down. Concentrate on what you're doing. No devices, no telly. Focus on the food. The reason I'm asking you to slow down is that satiety is a delayed reaction. We are programmed to gorge. So if you eat really quickly, you're going to miss that moment of feeling satisfied. This will feel really uncomfortable to start with. This is the only thing that's hard. Nothing else is difficult I'm asking you to do. So you slow down, check in with yourself when you've finished that amount of food and ask yourself, am I still hungry? Sometimes you will be. You go back and you have a little more. Sometimes you'll think that was really tasty and I could go some more. That's a different thing from still being hungry. And more often than not, you will be amazed that will have satisfied you. The other thing I would look at is also your alcohol intake. We know particularly women over 40 are consuming more alcohol now than they ever did before. Compared with fat, alcohol is the most calorie dense thing we can consume. Calories in fat, 9 calories a gram. Calories in alcohol, 7. Calories in carbohydrate and protein, only 4. So it's almost double the calorie in alcohol. It doesn't mean you've got to go teetotal. Really think about when you want to have alcohol and how much you want to have. Last thing I would say, and is you've looked at your food. It doesn't need to be much more complex than that. Someone asked about intermittent fasting. No, you don't need to do that. You don't need to do a keto diet. You don't need to stop eating carbohydrates. You don't need to do any of these types of baddie approaches to diets. This is lifestyle. You are going to need to move. More women than ever are really struggling to reach their movement and exercise requirements. 150 minutes a week. It's only half an hour a day. Brisk walking will make a huge difference, but you've got to combine that with a little bit of strength exercise. Again, you're not going to a gym, you're not going to be pumping weights. This is using your body as body weight as resistance. Simple things like squat, press up, abdominal curl up, not sit up, really simple exercises. Any decent gym will be able to show you how to do. You can come to Harley Street at home and see some of our exercise classes led by menopausal women. Really simple strength exercise and a little bit of self-care too. Some yoga, some mindfulness, some meditation. Whole essence of getting your lifestyle right is a real mind, body and soul. You have spun plates for years looking after other people. It's not even a luxury, it is a necessity to start taking care of you. And that might just mean half an hour a day of something that is all about you. In terms of your diet, planning is really essential. The minute something starts to feel anxiety, step back from it and just remember what we've talked about tonight. I've worked with thousands of women. I have never put anyone on a diet. We literally look at what you do now, tweak it, adjust it, and make it a little bit better.
And Nigel, what you're saying is really grounded, really straightforward, really simple. And there's so much advertising out there of different plans, different approaches. You can spend a lot of money on this. How do you help people to actually make the change? Because nobody, people go, yes, we completely agree with you, but it's really hard for me to make the change. So what have over the years of your experience of the thousands of women that you've helped, what tips would you give our audience this evening to think about what's the first step? How do you take that first step and then take another step after that?
Sure. That first step is doing your diary. That first step is then identifying 2 or 3 things on there that you look at and you think, I need to change that. You don't need to be a dietitian to see those things. You will see portions too big. I'm going all day without eating. 10 micrograms, 400 international units, Sarah, of vitamin D. Look at your diary and identify 2 or 3 things, probably 2 things around food, 1 thing around exercise. Make a plan, make sure it's really realistic, something you can achieve, and then think about how you want to be accountable for what you're going to do. Somebody's just mentioned on their coaching. Absolutely. I would say this is a hard thing to do on your own, because it's a continuous thing. This isn't something you do Monday to Friday and give up at the weekend. It's not something that's going to stop when you reach your goal weight. This is about changing your lifestyle. It's like giving up sugar in tea, giving up smoking, those types of things. It's going to take quite a while. Probably going to take you a good 3 months for it to start feeling normal. What I would also say is if you can access support and help, do it. Don't try and be a hero and do this on your own. We run 12-week programs where we've got at the moment 200 odd women going through the program together, really supporting each other all the time as they go through this. For me, changing your behaviors is much, much harder on one level than drinking a meal replacement every day for 3 weeks. Anyone can diet 3 or 4 weeks. Anyone can do that. Changing your lifestyle is much tougher. So I say, take the mind, take 2 or 3 things, work on those, get them under your belt, and then take another 2 or 3. See this as a long-term project. It's Project You. It's probably going to take you about a year to get all of those things in place. But if you do 3 or so at a time, by the end of a year, you're going to have a totally different lifestyle.
Nigel, that's great. That's really clear and simple. And I think we'll come back to some more questions in this area. But Claire, we might take a few questions around HRT. So maybe before we even get into them, if you could just explain to people, give a quick overview of what HRT is, and if we'll address one of the questions, which is, does all HRT contain estrogen?
Yes, thank you. And that's really sensible advice, Nigel. Thank you for that. So HRT stands for hormone replacement therapy. So for everybody, that will contain estrogen, and we're not aiming to give you back as much estrogen as you used to have when you were having periods. We're just aiming to top it up, to replenish by a small amount, to fill in that deep dip that's starting to occur, and just enough to sort of manage those long-term health consequences and help symptoms. If you haven't had a hysterectomy, if you have your womb, you also need the other hormone called progestogen. And this is because estrogen by itself thickens the womb lining, and in time that can increase your risk of cancer of the womb lining. And so we have to take the other hormone, progestogen, alongside the estrogen. So for everybody, it will be estrogen. And for most of us, particularly we haven't had a hysterectomy, it will be the progestogen.
Thank you, Claire. And maybe a word on testosterone, and then we'll come to some of the specific questions around HRT.
Yeah, so the situation with testosterone is different to that of estrogen, in that estrogen tends to fall off a cliff, whereas testosterone, the level slowly decreases, probably from your late 20s, early 30s, and it does the same in men also, interestingly. And for some women, that doesn't seem to make any difference whatsoever. But for other women, it can have an impact, and particularly all of the research around testosterone lies around libido. So for some women with a loss of libido or sex drive in the menopause transition and beyond, adding a tiny bit of testosterone back can be helpful. It probably helps around 2/3 of those who take it. Many women talk about it, to talk about taking it for fatigue, for energy levels, for cognitive function. And there's no doubt that some women do feel that it helps those symptoms. But unfortunately, the research doesn't back that up at the moment. But I know that there are lots of studies underway at present to see if we can prove that. At the moment, it doesn't look like there's a huge difference between that and placebo or dummy, but definitely libido.
Brilliant. And we have lots of information and advice on the website about libido and the use of testosterone. I know a lot of people come to see you and the other doctors, Claire, to discuss that as an option for them. So looking at some of the really great questions that we have here, if you take HRT, will you still experience these symptoms or changes to weight because your hormone levels aren't dropping, or will it stop it?
Yes, yeah, so that's a really good question. So we know that there is a significant reduction in risk of fractures and osteoporosis from taking HRT. And we know that taking HRT does significantly reduce the risk of heart disease also if you start it under the age of 60 or within 10 years of the menopause. So it's not going to keep your body as it was when you were 30, but it can help manage some of those symptoms. The evidence in terms of weight gain and can taking HRT reverse the changes we've spoken about that make a tendency to weight gain, it probably isn't enough to reverse the metabolic changes to our system that we've spoken about. But if taking HRT, as Nigel said, can help your symptoms of the menopause, can help mood, help anxiety, get you back on track in terms of motivation, then I have seen women really, it makes a massive difference to some women.
Brilliant. Thank you, Claire. And then a question for Claire and Nigel, then around people are talking about the different things that they're using. Fiona has a question about calcium. She's taking calcium to help with joint aches. And Claire, I think you've mentioned HRT helps with joint aches as well. In terms of calcium buildup, should she stop taking her calcium to help with joint aches, or keep going with it?
Yeah, so two parts to that. So unless you are really depleted in calcium and vitamin D, there isn't really any evidence that calcium will help joint aches and pains. So that's the first thing to say. So I'm not sure if it's helping you or not, but you may just want to think about that. The second part of that is there isn't any evidence that we have that shows that a bog standard normal standard calcium supplement should increase your risk of calcium buildup in blood vessels. So if that can be reassuring, but I would just maybe think about your symptoms and think whether you really need it. Have a look at your diet. Can you get enough calcium in your diet?
Look at those 3 servings. Are you hitting something like that? If you are, you probably don't need the calcium.
Thank you, guys. A great question here from Donna. She's asking, saying, if estrogen levels start to decline in your 30s on 40s and your body's changing, should we be looking to change our lifestyle and our habits every decade accordingly?
That's a great question. Nigel, do you want to go first with that one?
I think that would be a grand idea. My view is I think we should be starting to talk to women in their 20s and 30s and helping to prepare for this. We are really good at getting girls ready for puberty. We need to start talking to younger women about menopause very much earlier on. And yeah, I think, you know, my view is it would be a heck of a lot easier to get off that diet bandwagon in your 30s than it is going to be in your mid 40s and 50s. So 100%. Really good question. And yeah, but we're there. If you can find the women and they want to listen to us, we'll talk to them.
Yeah, it's so hard. You feel that it's really hard once you've gotten that horrible negative spiral. It does take a lot of effort to try and break out of that. And obviously we're all here to help. There's loads of information, Harley Street at home support, etc. But it is hard. If you can get good habits before you enter into the transition, it will stand you in good stead.
Thanks, guys. Really good and interesting questions. Celia's taking magnesium, effervescent magnesium. Is this beneficial?
Well, magnesium is a funny one. It's a bit like Prada handbags, really. It's kind of everybody's got to have a bit of magnesium on the go at the moment. It's probably the nutrient of the moment.
Slightly better value, Nigel, than a Prada
handbag.
I
would say so. Yeah. Does it do any good? The evidence, again, is, and this is what we've always got to do, is go back to the evidence. Evidence really isn't there to support it as being very helpful in relieving any menopause symptoms, supporting better sleep. Some women will take it to avoid things like restless legs. But again, the evidence isn't there. Now, what I would always say to that, providing you're not taking really a sort of toxic dose, if you want to try any of these things, try them at a safe level, and try them for 3 months. If you're going to see any benefit at all, you will see it within those 3 months. And if you then feel this is something I'd like to continue, then that's absolutely fine. If you decide you don't see any benefit, then stop taking it. So I think, you know, we have to always be mindful that if the evidence isn't there, it doesn't mean there isn't any benefit necessarily. It's just we haven't found it yet. Again, that doesn't mean take everything you can that anyone ever talks about. I've seen so many ladies, I bet Claire has too, come into clinic literally rattling with supplements, when actually solutions are right under their nose. Eat better, move more, you'll feel better.
Thanks, Nigel. Sarah, anything to add to that?
No, there's been talk of taking magnesium for sleep particularly, but the evidence base isn't there. But as Nigel says, you know, often it's because the right studies haven't been done. If it helps you and it's not doing any harm, then it's not a reason not to take it. If it's not helping, don't waste your money trying to carry on with it.
So while we're on supplements, I'm going to skip down to a question and then come back up. Is vitamin D3 the same as vitamin D?
Well, they're kind of slightly different versions of the same vitamin. Look, if we're out in the sunshine on a day like we've had today, we're making vitamin D, we're then making vitamin D3 in our skin, and that's all doing the things that it's meant to do to help us absorb calcium, as well as doing lots of other great things around the body. Bottom line is, you will be able to use vitamin D and convert it into vitamin D3. To be honest, I think take this, if you're going to take a vitamin D supplement, which I want all women to do, take the one you can afford, take the one that is easy for you to remember to take. Don't get too bogged down in whether it's D3, tricloferol, Dr Clare. There's a big posh name for it. Take a vitamin D supplement. Really don't worry about that level of detail. Your body is a remarkable thing. It will soon do the conversions it needs to.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nigel. That was great. Just a great question here from Faye, who started weight training. And her question is it better to stick to using your body weight only, or is it beneficial to use dumbbells and barbells as well?
I think where you start with is where your body feels comfortable. Ideally, to know that you're building new muscle tissue, which is the thing we need to do, start putting that metabolism back in gear again. You kind of want to know the next day, just feel a little bit tender that you've done it. You need to know you've done it. That's called, that's really then the muscle repairing, regenerating, rebuilding. If you can't put your pants on, you've overdone it, you know? So you really want to step back and think about and reducing the weight a little bit. But for most people, when you're going to start any sort of weight exercise, body resistance is brilliant. That's where things like Pilates can really come into their own as well. They're using a lot of body resistance. As you get stronger, you increase that resistance, and you might use hand weights, dumbbells, resistance bands, all kinds of different things. And I noticed that that question also was talking about changing shape, not necessarily seeing a change on the scales. That's fine. When you do start building a little bit of muscle, you may well find that your scales even suggest you've gained weight to begin with. It will settle down. What we're looking to do is see a change in your body composition, a change in your body shape, and the weight and the scales will catch up.
Brilliant. Thanks, Nigel. I've got a couple more questions for you. And Claire, there are several questions on HRT further down the chat. So I'm going to be a bit like mastermind on HRT for you in just a moment. I'll be firing them at you. So just to prepare you. Nigel, could you give us a recommendation from a snack apart from fruit?
Oh, goodness, yeah, absolutely. 2 oat cakes. I'm a massive fan of oat cakes, slow release carbohydrates. So 2 oat cakes with a teaspoon of peanut butter, some hummus, or a bit of cream cheese, or even a little, if you really want like a chocolate flavor, a bit of Nutella. You get the protein from the nuts in there, and that will give you a satisfying snack. You could use a baby bell or a laughing cow cheese and some cherry tomatoes or some grapes, or again to the old eggs or Ryvita, malt loaf with a bit of cream cheese. What you'll start to notice is there's a pattern. There are 2 food groups. I always like 2 food groups in a snack. I like 1 snack a day to be fruit, and 1 snack to be combination of carbohydrate and protein, or fruit and veg and carbohydrate, fruit and veg and protein. Ideally, a snack wants to be somewhere between 100 and 150 calories. So it's not a meal, it's just tide you over, keep those blood sugars steady, and enable your appetite. I mean that next meal you are hungry, not ravenous.
Really, I have to say, Nigel, you are making me a bit hungry. I don't doubt I'll be having a snack after the call tonight.
Notice those are not diet foods; those are normal foods.
No, yeah, they sound delicious. The question here from Rosemary, who's got high cholesterol. And she's asking, again, another great question, can she manage the dairy for her bones by replacing the cheese with an extra portion of low-fat yogurt along with a cup of skimmed milk?
Yes, you absolutely can. And also important to remember that calcium, you'll get a little bit more calcium in the lower fat dairy products because the calcium's in the watery bit of milk, not in the fatty bit. And if your cholesterol is a bit high and you're not on a statin, statin is a medication that Claire would probably talk to you about. If you're not on a statin yet, really worth trying a plant sterol supplement, and that would come in those little milky drinks, Flora Proactive or Benecol. Will give you 2 grams of plant sterols a day. Try that for 3 months, and we've got some good studies that show that that can be as useful in about 60% of people reducing their cholesterol as taking a sterol, as taking a statin. If you don't get on well with it and it doesn't work for you, then you might want to think about a statin later. It's Flora Proactive or Benecol. Don't get those confused with the little yogurt drinks that you take for your tummy to give you the good bacteria. These are the cholesterol lowering drinks. You know, the evidence is very, very robust for those, so worth a go.
Nigel, while I come to the next question, would you mind putting the names of those products into the chat just in case everybody didn't get it? That would be fantastic. Thank you. And the next question is from Lisa. And Lisa, I think so many of us will empathise with what you said. You're saying you regularly fast. It's not having any impact on your weight whatsoever. You're wondering if it's portion sizes on different day. And I guess your question, this one for Nigel and Claire, then we'll come to the HRT questions. She'd be interested to hear what a useful diet would look like. Lisa is a vegetarian. She eats lots of chickpeas, tofu, and edamame.
Sorry, what are you a useful?
If you thought about a day, a good day, what would a good food plan, you know, an eating plan look like for Lisa?
For someone who's vegetarian or vegan, absolutely.
And wants to manage her weight to start to bring it down.
Your breakfast, ideally, I'm a massive fan of something like a whole grain cereal, like a no added sugar muesli. You might want to put a bit of fruit on that, a chopped banana, some dried fruit, or some berries with low fat dairy alternative if you're vegan, and some yogurt on there. That's going to give you protein, carbohydrate, and your fruit sorted. Snacker would be probably a piece of fruit or some veggies or a bit of hummus mid-afternoon. Lunchtime, can't beat salads and some bread, or some soup and some bread with, again, peanut butter, maybe hummus. I'm trying to remember continuously about the vegan part. Then again, have yourself a selection of about 5 snacks. So again, my malt loaf, my different toppings on oat cake, some fruit, just rotate those. So you're going to have another snack in the afternoon and a really nice simple thing. What about something like a nice tofu stir fry in the evening with a bit of whole grain rice or some noodles? Super.
Fantastic. That all sounds great. So hopefully that's given you some inspiration and some good ideas. Now I'm going to gather up all the HRT related questions and throw them at Claire and then Nigel. We have a few more diet related questions, nutrition, and we'll come back to you. And then I think we'll be sadly out of time. So Lisa, I hope you found that really helpful. Nigel, I thought that was great. Thank you. Claire, I don't know if there's a particular order that you'd like to go through the I'll just run through them and we'll look at them here. Yeah. So this from Julie. She's been on a pump of estrogel for 5 months. But still feeling low, overwhelmed, and I'm really sorry to hear this, Julie, because it sucks, really, doesn't it? She's not sleeping. Would it help if she increased the dose?
Yes, it probably would, with the support of your doctor. So if you are going to increase the dose, obviously, I don't know your medical history, etc., but it is likely that you need some more estrogen with those symptoms. So chat with your GP or menopause specialist and try increasing the dose of estrogel.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Claire. And I should preface it by saying Claire obviously can't give out any individualized advice. she can give general recommendations, because she doesn't have folks' medical history, as I'm sure you can appreciate, and obviously you can book an appointment if you would like to see her. Claire, I'm going to put this to you because I know you're doing a huge amount of work on sleep at the moment, and I think, Martine, everyone will be interested in this question, and it's not just HRT specific, so just to be clear, what can you do to improve the quality of your sleep? And if you could talk to us about good sleep habits and sleep hygiene as well, Claire, that would be great.
Yeah, so several parts to this. So the first, developing really good sleep hygiene. Develop a habit before going to bed, avoiding a screen for about an hour before you go to bed is the general advice. And that's because the light from the screen tricks your body into still thinking it's the daylight. Making sure you're relaxing before you go to bed that can be really important. And for some women, it will be reading, meditation, listening to music. You know, everybody will have their different relaxing routine. Make sure your bedroom is conducive to sleep. So cool and dark. And this is really important with COVID and increasing numbers of people, women, everybody working in their bedrooms. We sometimes start to decondition our bedroom to sleep. And so this is why it's important to consider not having a television in your bedroom. I know some people like it, but if you do wake up in the night, it's really advised that you don't stay awake for longer than about 20 minutes in bed, that you get up, go out of your bedroom, maybe have a herbal tea, and then try going back to bed. Because if you lie awake for long periods of time in your bed, again, you start to dissociate your bed and bedroom with sleep or sex, basically. So cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, there is a really great evidence base behind it. In studies that have looked at all the different interventions for getting people to sleep and to stay asleep, cognitive behavioral therapy came out top. And this is really, it's different to sleep hygiene. It's really changing how you feel about sleep. So if you're somebody who goes to bed and instantly starts thinking, oh no, I can't get to sleep, I can't get to sleep, oh no, I can't get to sleep, the cognitive behavioral therapy will help change that vicious cycle of thinking. And similarly, if you wake up in the night and immediately you're thinking you're anxious about the next day and about not getting enough sleep, CBT can help challenge those thoughts. There are lots of apps available, Sleepio, Sleep Station, to name but a few. We popped a blog on my Menopause Centre website about apps that can be helpful. That is not an exhaustive list of interventions to help you sleep, but that's a few thoughts as a starter for 10. And I know we'll pop in the chat our information from the website on sleep also.
Yeah, brilliant. I've just put that in, and I'll add that the app blog as well, Claire. Then a couple of questions around, I'll group these. How long does it take to see an impact? And if you've been on, say, Everil Conti for 6 weeks and feeling bloated, how long will that settle down? How long would it take to settle down?
Yeah, so it generally takes a dose around 3 months to stabilize in your body, and it really can take 3 months. Often it's quicker, but with side effects, again, that can take that magic number around 3 months to settle. And people often feel bloated with Everil Conti because of the progestogen in it, which is called norethisterone if you look on the packet. And sometimes switching the progestogen, so going back to the drawing board if side effects aren't settling, and trying something different with your GP or menopause specialist if side effects don't settle.
Brilliant. And Nigel, I can see you're answering some of the questions, and so thank you, because the minutes are flying by. Claire, how would somebody know if they're progesterone intolerant?
Yeah, good question.
Yeah, it's a really good question.
Yeah, and it's common. So some women, when they take progesterone or progestogen, so just to clear up the term, so progesterone is the name of the hormone, and the type of hormone it is a progestogen. So progestogens include progesterone and all the other synthetic progestogens that we have in different types of HRT. And for some women, it makes them feel really blue, low in mood, low in energy, premenstrual, so bloating, breast tenderness, a bit headachy, but mood is the key symptom in progesterone intolerance. And you would know you've got it. It can be tricky if you're on continuous combined HRT and you're taking the progesterone every day. But if you're taking sequential HRT, where you have the progesterone for half of the month, women will say to me, by day 7, I was crawling up the walls. I felt terrible. I felt that there was a black cloud hanging over their head. It's really interesting. It's the same story each time. Some women will even feel suicidal when they take progesterone, and then when they stop it, all of those symptoms go away. So often it takes a bit of time with your doctor to really unpick what's going on. And it's really tricky for you because you have to take a progestogen if you're taking an estrogen. So it can mean that you've got a bit of working through of different types to see if you can find one to tolerate. So yeah, if it happens to you, I do sympathise, but speaking to a menopause specialist can help.
Thank you, Claire. And then probably second last question or so now on the topic of HRT. Question from another Claire asking, she's saying she's been started HRT, I think 3 years ago, has had periods since, regardless of how her dosage changed. Will her periods continue while she's on HRT? And do you have any advice on the Mirena coil versus HRT gel tablet option?
Right, okay. So the Mirena coil is the progestogen bit of the HRT, and you have that, and then you take the estrogen separately. Mirena coils are like Marmite. They are brilliant for many women. They stop bleeding, they're contraceptive, and they sit there for 5 years. You don't have to think about it. For other women, they have issues with them, and because of where it is, they really, really hate it. So most women are fine. So my opinion on Mirena coil is brilliant if it suits you. You need the estrogen alongside it. Bleeding on HRT after 3 years. So I would really need to know what type of HRT you're taking, because sequential HRT is designed to give you a bleed, estrogen every day, progestogen half of the month, and then you have a withdrawal bleed. Continuous combined, you don't bleed. So I can't really answer the bit about bleeding after 3 years without knowing a little bit more detail.
Brilliant, thank you, Claire. And then last question for you, and then maybe one for you, Nigel. Are dry eyes a symptom of menopause?
Dry eyes? Yes.
Sorry.
It can be, yeah. Sorry, is that for me or Nigel? Yes. And tinnitus can be a symptom as well. That I just saw that really there aren't any nutrients or HRT that help with tinnitus. That's a tricky ENT issue, even if it possibly is menopause related.
Yeah, I smiled because when I first started, working with Claire on the website for my menopause center, I was like, dry eyes, dry mouth. I didn't realize that there were all these other things that could be associated. So I just posted the link to that in our symptom checker. And then, is it possible to be allergic to vitamin D? I think I think somebody had a question in there. They said they get itchy or they feel like they're reacting to it.
I've never come across that. I certainly, and Claire will back me up on this, I am sure itchy skin is a massive issue around for some women in menopause. Yeah. We've got women in our community make themselves bleed, they itch so much, and that can be really quite a common issue. I think it would be more to do with menopause than vitamin D.
Yeah, although have a look at the ingredients, because sometimes the mixers that they put in with the active ingredient can cause allergies for some women. So if that would be the only thing I would add, but I agree with Nigel. It's really common symptom in the menopause.
Thank you. Well, look, I think we've run out of time. Nigel has answered loads of questions in the chat as well. So I think, Aideen, if we can, I'll pick up with you. We can get all of that included in an email that we can send out in the next couple of days, so everybody benefits from that too. So I think, Nigel and Claire, thanks a million. That was absolutely brilliant to hear from experts such as yourselves in this area. It's just so insightful and so practical as well, the advice that you've given. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Aideen, I'm going to hand back to you now to close the evening.
Thanks so much, Helen. That was such a great event and some amazing advice. So thanks so much to Helen and Dr. Clare and Nigel for joining us this evening and answering so many of your questions. And of course, thank you to all the members and everyone else who joined too for all your great questions. We hope you found it really helpful. If you'd like further information or would like to speak to the experts, please feel free to contact hello@mymenopausecentre.com. I think Helen has added some of these addresses into the chat function. Following the event, you'll also receive a link to the recording in case you'd like to share it or rewatch it. So good night, everyone, and thanks again for joining, and enjoy the rest of your evenings. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye, everybody.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.